Hello, everyone. This lesson, we're going to look at inertia a little bit more, and then we're going to look at how forces are vectors. So they add up as vectors, of course. Free body diagrams is just a fancy way of saying we're going to look at objects and basically just list all of the forces that are on them. And then the other big concept in the lesson is about net force. Net force just is all of the forces that are on an object just added up, the net overall force. All right, and so particularly we'll be looking at net force in a situation. There'll be an emphasis page along the way here about what the net force is if an object has constant velocity. Okay, we'll analyze that. So before I get going on that stuff, I found a couple videos lately, the reels on Facebook. They were actually, anyways, just I've added these into previous lessons, so I thought I'd show you this. The desktop here. So we talked about reference frames in the past, and I think it said something about only drivers will understand. Right, so the video is showing her having this car be her reference frame. So she thinks she's going forward, but obviously you can see the actual reference frame of the Earth there. So it's just basically encapsulates that has that idea that I mentioned in the past of your reference frame mistaking it for something that's moving, and then you get tricked into thinking you're moving and so on. And then this little video, kind of neat, the professor shows resonance and natural frequencies, right? So at the frequency he's moving at there, this one transfers the energy to motion. Then at the higher frequency, this one transfers the energy. And then I want to hear what he's saying, but yeah, on the really high frequency, this one transfers the energy. Kind of a neat little apparatus to show the idea of natural frequencies and resonance. Yeah, so moving along here, let's move that up to the top actually. Inertia. Okay, so these are some inertia videos along the way. So I'm gonna put kinematics card in that same video here. Certain ball. This is this one, I believe.
This is a demonstration of tenets of motion in the x and the y directions. What I have here is a cart that moves along the track and a ball with a plunger.
So I'm just going to skip a little bit here and show you there, but basically when it goes through that, it launches the ball up. And so the cart's going to be sailing along, the ball is going to get launched, and then you'll see, basically predict what's going to happen, right? The ball's going to get launched up and back down. So he shows the ball goes up and goes back in the thing, right? And so then the question is, what happens when the cart is rolling along?
If I depress it again, get a little bit of momentum.
Right, so now you can see the ball goes up and down and still lands in it. And the idea there, he's saying it's about the fact that the x and y components of the velocities are independent, right? Another way to say that would be like the ball had inertia. It had that sideways motion, and so it kept that sideways motion, right? So we can think of it as a review of the projectile motion stuff, and also link it to the idea of inertia. I think maybe he shows more. No, he's just talking about it. And then the other version of it was ball launched upwards. I think it's just a nicer video of it, if I remember right. It's maybe going faster or something. Go ahead here to where it is. Oh, there we go. Here we go. There goes the cart, launches and catches. Right? I have one of these, but it doesn't work anymore. So frustrating. It broke on me. And the real version of it, meaning the Facebook Reels version of it. I had this queued up, but let me. All right, here we go. One of the dangers of having too many great videos to show. Gotta find them. So this one you can relate to relative reference frame, but then also inertia too. Kind of complicated because of what's going on, but you might have seen videos like this recently. you look at the horizontal velocity, basically staying around the same spot horizontally. Pretty neat. I have a couple different versions of that one that crept up on my feeds lately. Where's the other one? Yeah, this guy here. Right from the side view, it's kind of nice.
I ride my bike on this moving track.
Even just the very start of it was kind of cool, right? Driving along and stops, like he's just basically riding like relative, so the velocity relative to the train, right? But had zero velocity relative to the ground. When he lands, he just still has zero velocity relative to the ground. Kind of neat.
I ride my bike on this moving track.
And obviously it's the same video, just from a different angle. Again, relative velocities, and even you could think of the independence of the horizontal vertical components. You could look at the inertia and all sorts of concepts that come up in that. And then the one that's more about inertia, I think. I did this one here. It's kind of cool. Came up lately, right? He has velocity sideways. He maintains that velocity sideways along with that wagon and so on. So, yeah, that's cool stuff. Now, the ball thrown from a car thing. I used to have an applet that showed this sort of thing, but I probably want to move that actually to here. Come back to that. More videos to do with inertia. There's so many. So first law and inertia with the egg. Find it soon here. What was it called again? Inertia egg demonstration. Hopefully it's in the same one. Inertia egg demonstration. Good. There we go. So this guy is zip ahead again a little bit here. So he's hitting this cardboard and these paper towel or toilet paper rolls out quickly. Eggs have inertia, so they're going to stay behind, and eventually here, working up the courage to do it, right? That's a nice little video to do with that. I have so many here. Bed of nails one. Oh yeah, this one's funny. Physics bed of nails. Physics bed of nails. YouTube. Yeah, this one's crazy. This guy and his helper here demonstrating to the class, right? So the idea of this is, get to the point here, the idea of this is you can hit that cinder block with the sledgehammer and not a lot of that force transfers through to the person because of inertia, right? Lots of weight here. You watch the follow through of the sledgehammer here. I was worried for the guy. So the follow through, like the guy didn't really do what you'd want him to do, but broke the board. Like that follow through could have broken his hip as well. Idea is good. There's better videos, but I like to show that one as just a cautionary tale, what to avoid. Seatbelt embrace. Oh my gosh, it's it has the inertia idea in it, and it's this weird commercial that I found where this guy's like miming that he's driving a car, basically, and then he's all happy, his family's watching him and everything else, and then he sees something coming, and he's like, "Uh-oh, gonna get in a car accident." So they come in, and they be his seatbelt, and they hold him. Now, if you think about this stuff in the car had the velocity with the car, right? If the car stops all of a sudden, it doesn't stop, it keeps going, right? He would have kept going and smashed into the windshield and gotten hurt, except the seatbelt holds him to the seat, right? And helps keep him from keeping his velocity, basically is what's going on, right? The car velocity changes drastically because of the collision. your body has inertia, so it won't change its velocity drastically unless it's held onto by a seatbelt. Okay, so that's the weird kind of seatbelt embrace life, they call it, whatever here. Wear a seatbelt. But there's just inertia in things around you that you see in weird commercials like that. And then the night bus, Harry Potter, people that so explain why Harry smacks into the window. And of course, the bus and him had a lot of motion, so the bus stops really quick, but he has inertia, so he maintained his state of motion, right? And until the glass acted a force on him to slow him down. Okay, so inertia, 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 and then the other one I had was Newton's bottle there, poker chips on poker chips. So the way this is possible, of course, all this stuff has inertia. The one poker chip gets accelerated out really quickly, and so on. Oh man. Yeah. All right. So this little applet that used to work showed a ball in the back window of a car, right? And it's the car is driving along, and then from one viewpoint, this person would see the ball go out the window, thinking that it's like going out sideways. So the pictures to do with this. So the applet doesn't work anymore, unfortunately. But basically, in the one viewpoint, from this person's point of view, it looks like the ball goes out the window. So picture the car over here and the ball going out the window. But in reality, what happens is the ball just keeps going straight, right? So if I lined up my two drawings, the ball going out the window is really just the ball keeping going straight is the idea of this. So I'm keeping that in there in case I manage to get Flash working again. But the idea is there. So it really just has inertia, and so because it has mass, and so it just keeps going straight, right? So this video shows things being thrown from a car and video of the different reference frames of it. I believe it's in here. All thrown from car. Let's get ahead here. So there's the viewpoint of the ball just getting tossed from the car. This isn't that's because of a corner and so on, right? But so you can definitely see the ball just going out straight out from the car. But from another person's viewpoint, it would see the ball going on an angle, right? So that's the kind of the view that I wanted to show there. So visualize the ball going straight out from your point of view, but traveling on an angle relative to the ground, right? And so they show the different paths and so on. But anyways, I don't need to keep going with that one. Just trying to get you to think about inertia in different situations. If you have a circular track, there was a homework question about this. I don't know if it's in this one or not. Circular track, no. I just did it as a question in the lesson instead. We had a circular track. And the question is like, which way would the ball go if the track ended? And a lot of people think it would keep going in a curl, but of course it wouldn't, right? You have these instantaneous velocities all the way along. So at this point, the velocity was up, and so it keeps that velocity unless the walls are acting on it, right? All right, so forces, right? We know we need forces to overcome motions, or overcome inertia, I should say, to have different motions, change your motion. So force is measured in newtons, named after Sir Isaac Newton. So how big is a newton? Here is 1 newton being pulled with my incredibly strong left pinky finger. If you have a chance, go around to find a science teacher or a teacher in your building that knows where the Newton scales are and spring scales, and just sort of see what a Newton feels like, right? But you can pull easily, 100 newtons on a scale, okay? And we'll learn more about what newtons are and how it relates to things we're more familiar with very soon. We got to get the equation down first in that, so we'll get there. So forces are vectors, of course, so they add up vectorially. So think about if we had a 7 Newton force forward and a 2 Newton force backwards, right? we'd have a net force of force 1 plus force 2. So forwards plus backwards becomes, of course, forward plus a negative forwards. Like think of the idea of the combining that as a negative 2 newtons forwards, as we know about how the negatives kind of work. So essentially that's the same as 7. Take away 2 intuitively, it works as well, of course, but this is how you can show it mathematically. So that would be 5 newtons. So the sum of all the forces on an object is called the net force. Okay, so that's very important, or F net. And so you just, all the forces added up, okay, is your net force. Yeah. Okay, so just the idea of adding up all the forces. So if we're looking at the net force here, obviously this group has a force this way and that group has a force that way. And so it's probably 0 by the looks of the picture. So you have a force, combined forces actually should do this. You have this force and this force and this force and this force, right? And you have this, all these forces and so on, whatever they all are. And if their grand total is the same both ways, then F1 and F2, force of team 1 and force of team 2, if this was negative 10 and this is plus 10, then the net force is just the 10 plus the negative 10, giving you 0. It's a stalemate in a tug of war. Okay? With objects, you can think of the lift force from this person and the lift force from this person, right? And so you have the total combined lift force, the net force. Let's just do this way, right? The net force on the system. So we have F net would equal, if this was 20 newtons and this was 20 newtons, then we have the 20 plus the 20, right? We'd have a grand total of 40, right? So we'd have 20 plus the 40, 20, sorry. A grand total of the 40, and so on, right? So the you can picture that when we're looking at forces and that on this, obviously here the tennis ball is hit upwards, so it's accelerating. Oops, I'm very sorry. Microphone, that must have been loud on your end. So if we're looking at, we're going to be doing free body diagrams soon. I'm tempted to do it here. Maybe I'll come back to it. And this one has a net force of, I'm going to have to do it here to get the net force idea across. So here, what you have is the force of the 20, right? And the force of the 40, or the 20, sorry, adding up to 40. Keep doing that by accident. What's going on in this situation is they must be balancing gravity. So force of gravity being negative 40, you can see the overall net force of the system, then net force applied up was this, right? So I better erase this or add in, the applied force, I guess, right? So it's really not F net at that point yet because it's not all the forces. So these forces, applied, let's say, is that, but the overall net force in this situation, you can tell just basically if it's zero velocity, zero acceleration, more importantly, right? The net force would be the 20 plus the 20 plus the negative 40, giving us 0 overall. But again, I'm kind of ahead of myself right now, but I just want to sort of start to lead towards that, okay? Here, we're going to have this applied force. So picture the force of the racket on the ball. So R on B, racket on ball, right? And then we have maybe the gravity force, whatever size it might be, right? FG. You can tell here that the net force equals those things added up, right? Racket on ball plus force of gravity. And so the numbers might be mismatched. They're obviously mismatched here, right? So this number might be like 100, and this might only be like negative 10. And so it has a net force of like 90 newtons up, right? Just by looking at it, you can tell the flex of the strings and that it's causing acceleration, right? So we're getting ahead of my lesson structure here, but that's how free body diagrams work, where you just basically list the forces. And so on its own, you can just have the dot. You don't need the racket and the tennis ball. You can just have the dot and the arrows. Okay. So with a two-dimensional example. So we did an easy one-dimensional example here, where they're just going to combine the way they did. Here, when we look at the adding these vectors up, clearly the 5 and the 7 aren't going to add up to 12 because angles matter, right? And so exactly the same as before, you just do your tip to tail addition, and you can get the net forces. You add it all up, and so on, right? So we could get our components, we could get our values, we could add it all up, and get answers just like normal. And so it's just a blinding quick review of the idea of adding components, getting the resulting component totals, and then working to get the length and the angle as usual, right? Pythagorean theorem and tan inverse. Okay, so then you can say, oh, okay, so the combined effect of those two forces is a certain number of newtons at a certain angle. Okay, pretty easy. It's nothing new is what I'm saying. So what I started to get to on this page here about the net force being 0 and that, let's focus more on it here. An important concept to realize is that if you have constant velocity, so here I said, basically this is going to be a net force of 0 because things aren't accelerating. Here you're not going to have a net force of 0 because things are accelerating, right? The one that proves to be really powerful, really useful, certainly in the starting questions we're doing, is this one here where we have no acceleration. All right. So the important thing to know is that if you have constant velocity, if a question tells you there's constant velocity, then there is a net force of 0. Okay, and it's based on this concept of inertia that we know. That if you don't have a net force, you don't have this net unbalanced force, then you're going to maintain that velocity, right? And of course, it goes the other way around, right? So if you know there's a net force of 0, then you have a constant velocity, right? And then I'm just being silly with the rest of this and be like, oh, and also, and another important point, and you should always remember and don't forget to, and that kind of thing, right? It's important. You really have to recognize this important fact, right? There's no buts, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just the way it is. If there's constant velocity, but I can cover up the rest of those if you want, just so it's not too ridiculous looking. But yeah, it's important to recognize that is a true fact, as they say. Of course, facts are all true, but whatever. So in a question where we're using this sort of thing, okay, an object has a horizontal applied force of 5 newtons on it, and it's moving with constant velocity. And so we're invoking a calculation here where we're going to determine the force of friction. Okay, and so you can think it through and say, okay, well, we have we're going to draw a free body diagram of this thing that I already kind of mentioned here, right? So we have this 5 Newton force forward, and we have like an unknown friction force backwards. And then the critical thing to recognize here is that we have a constant velocity, right? So emphasize here, we have constant velocity. This is the concept that is applying right there. We know we have a net force of 0 because of that. So we just go ahead and say, okay, well, we have the net force is the forces added up. We've got this applied force of 5 and this friction force backwards, and we know it adds to 0. And so we just solve and we say, oh, that means the friction force must be -5. Okay. So I already started doing the free body diagrams on the previous page, but it's just a dot to show like the center of mass of the object. You don't have to draw a wheelbarrow or a truck or whatever the question's about, right? Just an object of some sort. The dot just represents the center of mass, basically the center of the object. Okay. And then you can just help keep track of and visualize the different forces that are on it, right? And so it would lead to this idea here of this like vector diagram and so on. You could picture, two forces being drawn on the object, and you could put them tip to tail afterwards and picture that direction that it's going to have on it, right? So this might have been a free body diagram here where you had the dot there for the object, and you pictured there being a force sideways and a force at an angle, right? Well, you take that force at an angle and you put it in line with tip to tail with the other, right? Something like that. You put it tip to tail, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I can just add those vectors up. So the free body diagrams help you visualize what's going on. Okay. So, if you're drawing free body diagrams for things, just 1 second here. All right. So nice old CJ here. Free body diagram for this thing, well, you can tell it's at constant velocity. It's parked, right? So the net force is 0. And so the gravity force on it and this normal force, the normal force I'm introducing right now is that upwards force that holds it against gravity. So right now you're probably either sitting down or standing up or whatever. And so you're going to feel the force of contact from whatever's below you holding you up against the force of gravity, right? And so you can picture the situation being like this, where you have they're equal to each other, right? And so if we were to extend, well, actually, I was going to extend from this and add these up and show they add to 0, but I kind of started with that in the first place, right? So this is motion in which, so we're looking at pictures where at what motion, or we're considering what velocity or acceleration is obvious in each case. So 0 acceleration is obvious there. Here the person's just hanging, right? So again, 0 acceleration. So net force is 0, kind of idea going along with that one as well. Okay, so let's try and look at some other ones. This one, if you have a bunch of forces, this is the idea of the sum of all those forces, right? And so if you take all of these forces and you add them all up, so you got that one, got that one, got that one. Roughly speaking, I just sort of sketch those on there, and kind of reasonable looking kind of versions of things, right? The person's like really doing the bulk of the work here, you can tell, right? And so you add all that up, and within reason, we're like, oh, okay, I get it. Those are adding up to, maybe that person is pushing even harder, right? To give this like net force of straight up to balance gravity. Okay, so the idea of the tip to tail addition of vectors there, and making this force that adds up to 0, right? So we have the vector addition, right? We had F1 and F2 and F3 and F4, adding up, tip to tail and so on. And then, even for this whole thing here, you have the idea that you can tell like the net force appears to be 0 in that case, right? They're holding steady to take the picture, and they're like, okay, come on, take the picture. And the person's like, just a second, I've got to close this app down or focus and whatnot. And they're like, come on, seriously, you can picture it, right? What about here with that clothes hanging on a clothesline? What free body diagram are you noticing for that? So are you thinking about a gravity force down? I hope so. And then what's providing the lift force against the gravity? Well, hopefully you're noticing that there's going to be tension in these cables, right? And so we should have a picture kind of like that, where we have gravity force, we got tension in the cables, and so the combined pull up, right? So exactly that kind of situation here, where we have forces up, like the vertical component of those tensions is what adds up to balance gravity. So think about what happened if you tightened this cable so there was no sag in it, right? If you tighten that cable up enough that there was very little sag, these forces have to be bigger and bigger and bigger to try and have a vertical component up, right? So right now, if we had maybe that much of a sag, right, that might balance out this situation. The more you tighten that cable, the tightness in the cable in order to provide the lift force needed actually goes up by a lot more, right? So you shouldn't try to tighten the cable. You need to have some sag, or else you can't have a vertical component, right? So what I was coming back to here was an experience that I had, but like if you tighten this too much, you can't get enough sag, and you can't get a component upwards to actually lift the clothing, right? And so the first clothesline I installed at my house when I first moved to this area that I'm living in right now, I tightened the clothesline too much, put a load of towels on the line, and it broke. It fell off. Like it couldn't handle it. It was the right kind of clothesline and everything else, but I made it too tight. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's silly. I have to let it have some sag so that it can have some components upwards. So notice this in the world around you. When you're on a ski lift, notice the cable sagging. That's a necessary thing, right? This has to have a sag so that you have these components upwards to lift you. Okay. Picture a tightrope situation going on. They always have to have a little sag in the wire, and so on. Okay. So lots of physics to be seen around you. If these are situations where you have constant velocity, right? Even though it's a Bugatti Veyron, one of the fastest production vehicles in existence, if it's going an incredibly fast, constant velocity, then the forward arrow of the incredible horsepower, right, that's the applied force, if it's constant velocity, would literally just be there for the purpose of balancing the friction, right? So horizontally, it's balanced if it's constant velocity. And then you'd have force up on the tires from the ground, balancing the force of gravity. And so overall, you've got a net force in both directions. If it's constant velocity, that means that the net force equals 0. Right? Key thing to be able to start with all the time. And then that translates into, something like, well, if there's an applied force, let's say if the applied force equals, I don't know, making up a number here, whatever, number of newtons, right? Well, then that must mean that there's a drag force of a negative amount, the same amount, right? So this, the friction force would equal the negative exact same number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros, right? And so on. So you can picture how that would come out from, F net equals FA plus FF. And so you'd really get the, this is 0, right, from that idea. So let me make that red to match. And so you'd have the friction force would equal the negative of the applied force. And so it would really tell you that stuff, right? Any kind of picture of something. You have a picture of the gravity and the lift force of the wings matching, and you got the propulsion of the propeller forward, and you have the drag force back. You have a net force of 0 in all directions, right? If we have an accelerating situation, that's actually a future lesson, to be honest. But if you have a situation where you can tell there's acceleration, right? Well, then you're going to have a net force, right? So picture, an object that is accelerating. Well, then you're going to have an applied force that's bigger than the friction force. But we're going to dedicate a future lesson to that. I just thought I'd mention it. But the main idea here was the constant velocity results. So in a lot of these are pretty quick questions. Drawing the dot diagrams. Don't worry. Well, I don't want to spoiler alert here, but in both situations, the monkey's just hanging with constant velocity, or 0, really, just hanging there. So that actually makes there'd be really no distinction between these two. And so if this one here, I mentioned the idea of acceleration. So think about what direction the force must be if it's slowing down due to friction. That's a little extra, reaching beyond a little bit. But the rest are constant velocity situations. And so, yeah, a lot of these are pretty simple. Just adding the vectors up. These ones have a little bit of calculations in them, but the rest of them are really just straightforward if you have picked up the ideas of what we're talking about, right? So hopefully that makes sense. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching.